There is a small patch of water in the Texas Hill Country that most tourists photograph and never think about again. It looks like something out of a postcard. Turquoise, still, glassy enough to see straight down 30 feet. People swim there every summer. Kids jump off the limestone ledge. Nobody standing at the surface would guess that underneath that pretty blue circle sits one of the most lethal cave systems ever explored by human beings, or that for over 40 years, part of what happened down there stayed a mystery because no one could survive long enough to find the answer. This is Jacob's Well, near Wimberley, Texas. And this is the story of what happened when people finally stopped sending divers into it and sent a machine instead. Jacob's Well isn't a pond, and it isn't a sinkhole in the way most people picture one. It's an artesian spring, fed by the Trinity Aquifer, formed over millions of years as underground water slowly ate through soft limestone rock. From above, the well is just a circular opening, maybe 12 feet across. Step off the edge, and the floor disappears almost immediately. The shaft plunges close to 30 feet before curving sideways into a series of connected chambers that stretch back into the hillside, chambers that divers, out of necessity, ended up naming themselves because no government agency ever finished mapping the place. That's not an exaggeration. The cave keeps shifting. Small seismic movements common to the hill country region nudge rock and sediment around over the years, which means a passage that was open in 1985 might be choked with gravel today, and a passage that didn't exist then might be open now. Every map of Jacob's Well carries an expiration date whether anyone admits it or not. Underneath all of it is the same force that shaped it, the Trinity Aquifer, an enormous underground reservoir that once pushed water through the well hard enough to shoot a geyser 6 feet into the air above the surface. That pressure over geologic time is what carved the tunnels in the first place. And the tunnels are where the deaths happened. There are a few very specific reasons Jacob's Well earned its reputation, and none of them are supernatural. They're just physics working against soft tissue and limited air supply. Pockets of trapped air deep in the cave can build up carbon dioxide, and CO2 poisoning is deceptive. It doesn't announce itself with panic or breathlessness. It creeps in as confusion. A diver's thinking slows, their sense of direction erodes, and they can be dangerously disoriented while still feeling, on some level, physically okay. Then there's the silt, a fine layer of sediment coating almost the entire cave floor, which turns instantly into a blinding cloud the moment a fin or a hand disturbs it. Visibility can go from perfect to zero in under 2 seconds. And in tunnels barely wide enough for one body, zero visibility isn't an inconvenience. It's often fatal. Divers who have made it into the deeper chambers have also described something harder to explain with instruments: a steady pull, a sense of being drawn forward even while holding still, likely caused by pressure differences between chambers, but unsettling enough that more than one experienced diver has turned around because of it. For decades, the only way anyone learned anything new about Jacob's Well was by risking a human body inside it. That changed when a team of scientists and engineers decided the smarter move was to send something that didn't need to breathe. The submersible drone deployed into Jacob's Well was not a toy. It carried high-resolution cameras, sonar capable of mapping tunnel geometry in the dark, and floodlights bright enough to cut through water that had swallowed human lives without ever giving up what it took. An experienced operator guided it from the surface, while a small group of geologists, cave diving veterans, and researchers watched a live monitor feed, no one entirely sure what they were about to see. The first minutes were almost peaceful. The drone drifted through the entrance shaft, its lights sliding across limestone walls polished smooth by centuries of moving water. It looked, honestly, beautiful, the kind of footage that belongs in a nature documentary, not a search operation. Then it reached the second chamber, and the mood in the room changed. Scattered across the silt were objects that didn't belong to the cave. A fin, half buried. A length of detached hose from an old breathing apparatus. A dive light lying on its side, its bulb long dead but its housing intact, sitting there the way it must have landed decades earlier. These weren't geological curiosities. They were personal effects, remnants of people who had entered the cave and never walked back out of it. By the time the drone pushed into the third chamber, the operators had stopped narrating. The chamber opens wider than the ones before it, and colder, and the drone's lights caught something drifting rather than resting. A glove, suspended in open water instead of settled on the floor, moving with a current too faint for a human diver to have felt directly. It's the kind of image that plays tricks with a room full of tired, tense people staring at a monitor. And for a moment, something long and indistinct crossed the edge of the frame before the drone's lights lost it again. Nobody in that room could say, with certainty, what it was. Sediment. A trick of the current. A trailing strap from old gear disturbed by the drone's own wake. What matters is that nobody offered a confident explanation, and the silence that followed said more than any theory would have. Deeper still, near the entrance to what local divers have nicknamed the cathedral, the fourth and most feared chamber in the entire system, the drone's camera caught a reflection buried halfway in the gravel. Glass. A diving mask, a model that hadn't been manufactured in decades. Any diver watching the feed didn't need a placard to know what that meant. Some version of the past was still down there, exactly where it had been left. To understand why that discovery mattered so much, you have to go back to the night that made Jacob's well infamous in the first place. In September of 1979, two young men decided to push further into the cave than most trained divers ever attempted. One of them, in his early 20s, was already an assistant diving instructor, someone who had spent real time teaching other people the exact safety rules he was about to ignore. The other was a college student, newer to diving but eager, and by most accounts, trusting the more experienced diver's judgment completely. That detail matters, because it explains something important about how a place like Jacob's well claims lives. It doesn't just take the reckless. It takes people who trusted the wrong moment. Late that night, without backup lights, without a safety line, the two men went in. A third diver who'd come along stayed close behind, uneasy about how far they were pushing. At the narrow gap leading into the fourth chamber, a passage so tight that divers have to detach their tanks and drag them through separately, the two men slipped through, one after the other. The diver who'd stayed back banged his knife against his tank, the standard signal to check in, to turn around. No response came back. He held his light on the opening, waiting. They never turned. Eventually, with his own air running low, he had to make the hardest call a diver can make and surface alone. When he broke the water, the pool behind him had gone murky. Sediment kicked up violently enough to cloud the entire well. In a cave like this, that kind of disturbance means only one thing. Something happened, fast, and it had already been buried by the same silt that caused it. Search efforts began before sunrise. What followed over the next 12 days was one of the most harrowing rescue and recovery operations in American cave diving history. A former Navy diver with serious technical experience volunteered to go in alongside a local game warden. They followed every protocol available, placed backup air tanks at staged depths, ran safety lines the whole way down, checked and rechecked their gauges. It should have been enough. It wasn't. Deep in the same collapsing passage, the cave shifted around him, without warning. Loose gravel gave way and pinned his arms to his sides in an instant, crushing tight enough that his chest could barely expand. The water around him turned opaque with disturbed sediment. He couldn't signal his partner. He had, by his own later account, only a handful of minutes of air left and no way to move. What he did next is the part of this story that still stops people cold. Rather than thrash and risk a violent, panicked death that his partner might have to witness, he deliberately removed his own regulator and began letting water in, choosing, as much as anyone can choose anything in that situation, the manner of his own ending. It was his body, not his mind, that saved him. An involuntary convulsion shifted the gravel just enough to let a shred of light through, and his partner spotted him and forced a spare regulator back into his mouth. He took one breath and lived. As he ascended, the small amount of air trapped in his stomach expanded rapidly with the dropping pressure, leaving him swollen and in agony by the time he reached the surface. He survived with a massive hospital bill and no easy way to pay it. The local diving community held fundraisers just to help cover the cost. And then, almost unbelievably, he went back. Once he'd recovered, he hauled bags of cement down into the cave himself and sealed the passage into the fourth chamber shut, by hand, so it couldn't do to anyone else what it had nearly done to him. The two missing men's families didn't accept that the cave had simply won. They brought in a professional recovery company with real cave-clearing equipment, suction hoses to pull gravel out of the blocked passage, teams working in shifts to bag and haul rock to the surface. It was slow, dangerous, expensive work, and the cave fought back at every step. For every foot of gravel cleared, more slid in from above to replace it. Hours of labor could be erased in minutes. Eventually, a second team of outside experts was brought in to give an honest assessment, and their conclusion was blunt. Continuing the recovery effort risked more deaths than it could possibly prevent. 12 days after the two men disappeared into the fourth chamber, the operation was called off. They were declared unrecoverable. The equipment went back on the truck, the families went home without their sons, and Jacob's well went back to looking exactly like it always had from the surface. Calm, blue, and inviting. There's a strange twist buried in the more recent history of Jacob's well that most people never hear. In its prime, the spring's outward flow was so powerful that early explorers couldn't even swim against it. It pushed water 6 feet into the air and roughly 170 gallons per second out of the ground. As Central Texas grew, heavier draws on the Trinity Aquifer for homes, farms, and businesses steadily lowered the water table. None of it was illegal. All of it added up. In the year 2000, Jacob's well stopped flowing entirely for the first time in recorded history. It has gone dry repeatedly since 2008, 2011, 2013, 2022, each dry spell longer than the last. Here's the part that matters for safety. As the water pressure drops, passages that used to be sealed by the sheer force of outflowing water become physically accessible. A spring that's losing pressure is, paradoxically, a cave that's getting easier to enter. And every diver who enters a shifting, unstable, undermapped tunnel system adds risk to a place that was already responsible for more diving fatalities than almost anywhere else in the country. Local officials eventually purchased the surrounding land, put up fencing, and posted warnings. Real, meaningful steps, but ones that arrived decades after the deaths that made them necessary. Today, swimming and diving restrictions are enforced at various points depending on water conditions and safety assessments, and cave diving into the deeper chambers is effectively off-limits to anyone without serious technical certification, if it's permitted at all. The submersible exploration didn't reopen Jacob's well to divers, and it didn't erase the danger baked into its geology. What it did was let researchers document a hostile environment without asking another human being to risk their life to do it, mapping shifting passages, identifying hazards, and recording the physical remnants of decades of history without adding to the list of names the cave has claimed. Jacob's well is still there. It still looks like the most inviting swimming hole in Texas from the surface. And it's still, underneath that surface, a place where geology, water pressure, and human overconfidence have combined to devastating effect again and again. The drone gave us a longer, safer look into that darkness than any diver ever managed, but it didn't make the darkness any less real. The question locals and officials are still wrestling with isn't whether Jacob's well is dangerous. Everyone agrees on that. The real question is how much access the public should have to a place that has proven, repeatedly, that it doesn't forgive mistakes.